And the first speaker would be Professor Nils Chr Stenseth from the University of Oslo. And I am very pleased to say that Professor Stenseth is not here for the first time, and he visits Brno and Augustinian Monastery quite frequently. And Professor Stenseth, he's famous Norwegian biologist, and he's focused on ecology and evolution. He also is professor of marine biology, which means that he has very broad interest. And his motto is that biology is just one discipline, and he continuously strives towards unifying many subdisciplines within biology. And as he tries to merge ecological and evolutionary thinking, his interests are focused on the work of Charles Darwin. I am sure that everyone knows about Charles Darwin and his work as he based the principles of evolution, and he published the most important book in 1859, which was named On the Origin of Species. And we know that Gregor Johann Mendel knew this Darwin's work, but unfortunately for two of them, but also for the whole biology, Darwin didn't know the work of Mendel. And another person which would be mentioned by Professor Stenseth would be Charles Sutherland Elton, and this person is a quite famous English zoologist and animal ecologist, and I am sure that Professor Stenseth would mention connection of Mendel, Darwin, and Elton. So please, the floor is yours, and we are looking forward very much for your talk.
Thank you very much, Prorector, dear Prorector, and dear ladies and gentlemen, dear friends of Mendel and modern biology. I'm an evolutionary biology, having spent much of my time, research time, and thinking about how ecology and evolution should be closer integrated than they often are. So I established and run a Center for Ecological and Evolutionary Synthesis, really focusing to a large extent on how ecology drives evolution, and when evolution happens, that changes ecology. Coming back to that. So, as was mentioned, I will talk about two people that are very well known to you from history, Mendel and Darwin. You have heard about them many times. All school books talks about them. But few people outside the narrow field of ecology have heard about Charles Elton. But he's the founding scientist of population ecology, empirical-based population. I'm coming back to that. So Mendel, Elton, and Darwin is really genetics, ecology, and natural selection. Mendel, he founded genetics. Darwin, the theory of evolution through natural selection, that is natural selection. And Elton, modern empirical-based population biology. Today, the time we are living in is the century of biology. biology is a very active scientific field, and biology influences us in many ways. The time we are living through now, we are fighting biology, the virus, but we are fighting the virus through modern biology, the vaccine. A vaccine that was produced, tested and everything in 1 year. It's unbelievable, but it is true. This is the century of biology. Or I should correct myself. This might be the century of biology in its full, all deep meanings. It will be the century of biology if we bring together evolution, ecology, and genetics. And if you like, if we bring together Mendel, Elton, and Darwin. This is what we very often think about as modern biology, the DNA sequence. And to some extent it is. It is a key stone in modern biology. But biology is much more than the double helix and the DNA and genetics. Modern biology is Darwin and Mendel and Elton. And modern biology really started with the origin that was written, thought, written by this guy. And Charles Darwin, he founded a theory of evolution through natural selection. So he established a process of natural selection, the process of evolution. I'd like to remind you what that process really is and what that process of natural selection requires. It requires the following, that you have entities, individuals if you like, that are the following three properties. It can reproduce itself. It has heredity, so that your offspring resembles you more than any random person around you. And the third property is that in a population, these entities or these individuals have variation in the heritable, in the hereditary traits. There are some words I can't say. In the population, they vary. Genetic-based properties vary in the population. So there's a diversity that is genetically based in the population. Notice the word population. A key element. It was a key element in Charles Darwin thinking. Then if you have population with individuals or entities with these three properties, then if the environment changes, then the best fit individuals will be different, and they will be selected for. So if you have population with individuals having these three properties, then whenever the environment changes, evolution might happen, and in general does happen. So Darwin understood this. This is what Darwin, this is really the contribution by Darwin when it comes to the theory of natural selection. So he understood this, but he did not understand heredity. And he was fighting with this for his whole life after he published his origin. probably before also. And he had various theories, none of them, various theories for genetics or heredity. None of them would ever have worked. Mendel, he found that mechanism out in back frontier, in the greenhouse. So Darwin did not understand the process of heredity. But he understood that there needs to be such a process of heredity if evolution through natural selection was to happen. So he understood that something like Mendel found needed to be there, but he didn't see how. Incidentally, Darwin had read Mendel's contribution, I understand, but he didn't understand it. And lots of other people didn't understand it either. I'm reflecting on that a little bit later. And from Mendel, been a fantastic development in our understanding of genetics, what Mendel understood out here. Fantastic development. To the Nature paper that described the double helix, got them the Nobel Prize. But whenever there is these breakthroughs in molecular biology, understanding the double helix, then evolution has a tendency to sort of disappear. So in the period after 1953, when the Nature paper was published on the double helix, evolution and natural history, understanding what goes on out in nature, sort of disappeared out of the scientific circles. And a hero in the field of evolutionary biology, he said this in a talk he gave in a talk he gave in 1958. May I turn to begin with a little-known book of nearly 100 years ago called The Origin of Species. They had forgotten about Darwin, but not Mendel. That was Ronald Fisher. Many things that can be said about Ronald Fisher. He was a character in many good and many bad respects, but he was a fantastic thinker. So this book had a tendency to be forgotten every once in a while. I have a little bit small parenthesis here about Darwin. Although Darwin didn't understand what Mendel was talking about, there are some links to the people that understood genetics and the double helix. There are some links, personal links here. So 2 weeks before Darwin died in 1982, he published his last paper in Nature, and that is a very nice journal. He described a bivalve, plum, that he had gotten from a British Midland shoemaker by the name Walter Crick. And this is the Nature article, and this is where he sort of bring this back to Walter. That's the family of Watson. Watson and Crick that published this. Although we didn't understand, there were some links here. But The discovery of the double helix by Watson and Crick generated a fantastic development within genetics. And there was a series of Nobel prizes that came. It was a victory. And it was technology, and they got a couple of Nobel prizes actually, and it was a technology development that we refers to as genomics technology. A colleague of mine back in Oslo, he came to me several years ago and he said, Nils, I need this machine. This is the one in the lower corner, 454. I need this machine because he was a geneticist, if I don't get that machine, my whole career will be ruined. I said, how much does it cost? Well, it cost 5 million Norwegian kroner. 500 euro. Oh, sorry, we don't have that kind of money. Leave my office. But we got it a little bit later. So this is what Mendel has generated. Fantastic victories. This is what Mendel has generated outside here, in this house. We are. And it did this kind of all sorts of experiment. I'm sure you will hear more about this later. And he wrote this down in manuscript. Just above us here, in the library, I had a great experience. Fantastic. Having this manuscript in front of me. And I could look at it. At first I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I was told, this is the real manuscript. And this is what you find in textbooks today. Elementary textbook, explaining genetics. What he wrote. So without Darwin and Mendel, we can't really understand what's going on out there. And Mendel today is, of course, gene sequences. So I have the double helix there. I will take you through a tour now. The development of biology. First, it will be the historic development, followed by the conceptual development. The historic development starts with Darwin. Because he made biology a real science, a modern science, before it was philosophy. Nothing wrong about philosophy. But it's not natural science. He made it natural science. Then shortly after came Mendel. But as I said, no one really understood him. But Weizmann from Austria, I think, and I think so because other people think the same. John Maynard Smith is one of them. Evolutionary biologist in the UK, dead many years ago. Weizmann, he was looking in the microscope and he saw the nucleus of the cell. And I think, and other people think, that people then could identify a possible location for where the hereditary substance, whatever it was located. So I think Weizmann was essential in making people understand what Mendel had a hypothesis about and no one else understood. But then when the rediscovery of Mendel, then genetics was seen as an competing theory to natural selection. So Mendel and Darwin was seeing us opponents of each other. And that lasted for some 30 years. Here again is Ronald Fisher. From the turn of the century to 1930, Darwin and Mendel was opponents to each other. The changing thing out there was either, some people thought, due to evolution through natural selection or mutations. But 1930 is another important point in time. That's when genetics and natural selection was brought together. It's hard for us to understand that Darwin and Mendel was opponents to each other. It's hard to understand that genetics and natural selection is opposing theories to each other. But that's what happened. And since then, it has been a fantastic development within biology. Various type, fossil records. We get data from variation among population out in the region. Here's the finches. We can reconstruct history, human genome, etc., etc. I could continue forever here, but I won't. I will rather change to the conceptual development of biology. And these two figures I've been referring to comes here. Darwin and Mendel. And the microscope. And the DNA. And the sequencing machines, technologies. That is much more than technologies, theoretical developments. So this top row, going from Mendel to the development within the understanding of the genetic substance, hereditary mechanism. It's a fantastic development that, of course, is very, very, very important for us human beings and in Mendelian medical genetics. Very important. But it's not evolution. But it's fine. Ecology and population ecology is being brought in by Elton. That's the first time you see the picture. And ecology and the processes that takes place within a population. Some individuals being better fit to the environment than others. Remember what I had when the background changed. Then the selection changed also. Ecology defines the natural selection. Ecology defines the selective pressure. And then lead to evolution. And there are much medical insight, what I might call evolutionary medicine, which of course is very different from what usually is called evolutionary medicine. but really understand the evolutionary process that takes place inside your body. Antimicrobial resistance is one of those processes that has led to antimicrobial resistance thanks to evolutionary changes. But we leave that. Elton. He's a founder of empirically based population biology. His name, and he lived. I had the great pleasure of meeting him in 1990. I was chatting with him for a couple of hours at his home. We had one thing that joined us. That was lemmings and population variation in lemmings. Lemmings, in the northern part where I'm coming from, every once in a while they are very scarce. Every once in a while they're very, very abundant. It's called lemming cycles. I had a great interest in lemmings. He changed in 1920s to become very interested in lemmings. Back to that. But that was what they talked about when he was 90-year-old, very clear in his head. He was nervous when I came because I was one person that probably knew more about lemmings than he did. But there was no reason to be nervous. So he founded population biology, but also community, how species are interacting out there. He also founded a Euro Institute and a journal. He came from Liverpool, and he writes about his father and his mother, intellectual people, that he said made me have very high standard. And I was aspiring to a very high intellectual standards. He was invited by Huxley. He was at Oxford, student in Oxford. And he was invited by Julian Huxley to Spitsbergen to do field work. Because there was a group of people in Cambridge at the time that wanted to get out in nature, not only look at specimens in the museum, but out in nature. And he was brought along to one of these and here's where the lemming comes in. Not at Spitsbergen, but in Norway. This was what he did in Spitsbergen. He was doing ordinary field work, hard field work. But he was returning home. He was returning home and stopping by in Tromsø. Very difficult to both see here and there at the same time. I see that. Tromsø, small city, was a small city in 1921. And he was an intellectual. So they stopped over for a day, and he went out in the street and he asked for, what is a local bookstore? Remember, he was an intellectual. And they showed him to D1 bookstore. And he found this book, Norges pattedyr, Norwegian Mammals. He did not read Norwegian, but in that book, he found this page and similar pages like that. He didn't understand what it was because he didn't read Norwegian. So we asked the guy in the bookstore, what is this? What are these numbers? What are these years indicating? Well, the guy in the bookstore, he said, well, this is lemming peak years. Where lemming is common. And he there and then, that's what he told me, he there and then said, there is some regularity here. That's a problem. That was and then in 1923, and in 1924, he published what really is the first empirical-based population biology paper. And I would say that this is the foundation, this is a starting point for modern population biology. And it's based on Robert Collett's Norges pattedyr, Norwegian mammals. And later on in 1942, he wrote a book himself, became a Bible for those people working on population that goes up and down in time and space. This was in 1923-24. Remember, at the turn of the century, Mendel and Darwin were seen as opponents to each other. And there was absolutely no population thinking at the time. Here comes Elton in 1923-24 and start the discipline, empirical-based population biology. Which is a burst of empirical-based population biology. Coming back to why this was important, this period, a few decades after the turn of the century. This is a keystone for making this a century of biology. Darwin had population thinking in his mind. Remember, he said that if you have individuals that differ in their heritable traits in the group of these individuals, a population, a population. As a matter of fact, as did Mendel. But very few other had. Then I'm in a way jumping now to 1953. Remember Ronald Fisher, he says that this modern geneticist had forgotten about this book called The Origin. In 1999, the Crawford Prize, the Nobel Prize in Biology, the Nobel Prize in Ecology and Evolution, or Evolutionary Biology, was given to these three people, Meyer, Williams, and Maynard Smith. For really, the development of the concept of evolutionary biology that really has both ecology and evolution and genetics. And of those, I would like to highlight George Williams, because George Williams brings in natural history in biology thinking, which was quite extensively anchored to the laboratories, not out in. So this I've basically said. Opposing. But population thinking came back in biology, in evolutionary biology, in the 1920s and 1930s. Remember, Elton published his first paper on population biology in 1924. And then Ronald Fisher, the one I quoted, we'll see the quote next slide, and J.B.S. Haldane, the teacher, by the way, of John Maynard Smith, a theoretical evolutionary biologist. that incorporated into the mathematical models population thinking. There was many others. I turned to begin with a little-known book nearly 100 years ago called The Origin. This was bringing ecology back into evolutionary thinking, population thinking. But here comes another one, Lee van Whalen. The only slide I'm going to mention him. But he, building on Darwin, by the way, said that remember, most of the environment for any given organisms are other organisms. So they have to evolve and adapt to each other in one way or another. You have seen this before. But I'm only to remind you that the population thinking was the key element that brought Mendel and Darwin together in the period between 1920 and 1930, and made it evolutionary biology. I said that modern biology starts with the publication of The Origin. That is to some extent true. It is true. But you should always remember that Linné classified organisms out there. That Darwin explained how they were organized together through the theory of evolution, through natural selection. So, Mendel was a cornerstone. Together with Mendel was a cornerstone, together with Darwin, as well as the middleman in the title of my talk, Charles Elton. These three guys are the heroes, are the most important player in developing evolutionary biology. Thank you very much.